Howdy guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Ben, and this is my part 2 to my previous video where I talked about how we can recover skin texture that's been lost due to overblown highlights or overexposure. So the picture we're looking at today is this portrait here, which looks pretty nice, but if we zoom in, we can see that there is this big patch of overexposed skin on her forehead. And what we're going to do is we are going to create some new skin texture so that we should end up with something that looks like this. And we can see that I've kind of had to create skin texture completely from scratch to make it look, hopefully, realistic. Now, I will preface this by saying ideally you shouldn't be in this situation. But what I want to do with this photo is we're going to just imagine that this is the only shot we have. We have no other references, and we're just going to have to do our best to create skin texture that doesn't exist. So before we get started, I do want to preface this by saying a few things. One, it's really important to understand your final output. So I know that this photo is going to live and die on Instagram, which means that the highest resolution it'll be seen at is 1350 by 1080. That means that we can get away with quite a bit because in the end, you know, it's going to be seen at about something this size on your phone, and you're not going to see every single little detail. So that means we have a bit more flexibility when having to create some of the skin detail. And two, you know, is it going to be suitable to be on the cover of Vogue magazine or printed on some billboard? No, but if that was the case, you wouldn't be in the situation in the first place. This is just to kind of help you out with those really extreme situations where you have to correct something. So obviously this is an over-exaggerated example that I created, trying to simulate a situation where, let's say you shot in JPEG, you were underexposed, but you had a bright highlight on her forehead. And so when you brought the exposure up, you just lost all of your detail in that overexposed area. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you a method that I came up with recently that I think works pretty well, and you have a lot of control over each step. And so what we're going to do is basically create 3 layers, a kind of base color layer, a noise layer to create some tonal variation, and then a skin texture layer. And then we have the ability to adjust each of those layers individually, giving us a lot of control over how realistic we can make our skin look. All right, so the first thing I want to do is create a fill layer. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Layer, New Fill Layer. And by default, the fill layer will be whatever color you had selected here in this set fill, but I want to change it to a skin tone color. So let me go ahead and turn this off. Let's grab our little color picker and let's go ahead and grab a light color of skin, something around here, and then click this little patch here to set it to our fill color. And now when we turn our fill color back on, it should be that color. Of course, we can always adjust this. You can see here, you can adjust it to anything you want, but we're going to use that now for our base color. And so what I want to do is just limit this fill layer to the brightest parts of the image, the overexposed parts. So we could do that by doing a blend range where we come down here and we can just take the fill out of the shadows. That does a pretty good job. Another way, I'm going to reset this, is we can also do it with a luminosity mask. So if we go to layer and new live mask layer, luminosity range, it's going to work very similar to that blend range where we can pull it out of the darker areas of the image. One thing I do like about this is that we can click on the preview to actually see our mask. I want to make sure I'm really filling in those bright areas. But another thing I like about it is you have this blur radius. So I can increase the blur radius to kind of help smooth it out a little bit. So we can increase the blur radius something like this, and I can go ahead and fill it in. Now I don't want to just fill in the bright areas like that. I don't mind actually going a bit over because we can then mask it out later. And because this is a luminosity mask, we can still at a later point adjust this, but for now I want to just have it a little bit over what I normally would do, something like that. Okay, so now we kind of have our base color, but as you can see, it's affecting the entire image, so we need to mask that out. Make sure we have that fill layer selected. Let's just go ahead and create a mask, and then we can invert that mask and then switch over to a paintbrush and make sure we are painting with white. I'm going to go ahead and just do a 100% flow brush now. and we can now paint in that effect. And because we are working with a mask, I can go to a lower flow brush to kind of help smooth out that transition along the edges so it's not so harsh. But like I said, we're going to be making adjustments all along the way. This is a process where it's not going to really start coming together until all the steps are done. And each step along the way is not going to look correct until we get to the last step where we actually start making adjustments for it to look really good. Okay, so here we have a kind of base color. And because we are on a fill layer, as long as I have this move tool selected, I can still come over here and adjust that color to anything I want. So in case I think I want it to be a little bit brighter, I can raise the brightness up, or I can lower it to make it more saturated. I can do whatever I think is going to look good. Cool. So this is a start. And because we've basically lowered the exposure just on her forehead, we do need to lower the exposure on these other highlights on her cheek. Now, ideally, I would do this on a separate layer so I can control it individually. But what I'm going to do for now is just basically just kind of softly paint it in like this. And so you can see I just kind of cut out the highlights on those cheeks just a tad. Maybe come back with a black paintbrush, lower flow, and kind of blend it in together. Ideally, like I said, the best thing to do is do this on a separate layer so you can control just this part individually. And I would probably even do the whole nose on a separate layer, so can do that individually to make it look as realistic as possible. But for this video, I am just going to have everything kind of on one single layer to keep it simple. Okay, and you can see here I can kind of mask out the nose a little bit to kind of bring it in. So there you can see we've just basically knocked down the exposure on those overexposed areas of the skin. But of course, if we zoom in and we look at the forehead, we just have one solid color, which doesn't look natural. So the next thing we need to do is now add some tonal variation in her skin. Now, in order to do that, we're going to use a Perlin noise filter. So before we do that, we need to make a new layer for this filter to go on. So we're going to create a new layer. And then what I want to do first is grab some skin color that we like, maybe something like this, and just leave it in here because we're going to use it later. So let me just go ahead and grab something kind of near that light area that we created, leave it in there. We're going to use it later. All right, so now we're going to go to filters, noise, and Perlin noise. And you're going to get this kind of cloud shaped filter. And we can use the octaves and the zoom, and persistence I think looks best at 100 to kind of create a interesting noise layer. So in order to see what we're doing, we're going to click down here to split view, zoom in. And what I want to do is kind of create noise that looks like it would match her skin. Now, of course, right now we're looking at it in black and white because those are the two colors we had initially. But by using that skin patch we took earlier, I'm going to go ahead and set the black to that. So that way I have this kind of skin tone and going to white. Now, right now it's probably really hard to see on YouTube, but let me see. I'm going to go ahead and actually just lower the luminosity so we can actually see more what we're doing. And you can see here that I just want to use this to kind of get something that looks like tonal skin variation. So now that you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to actually raise this up again, maybe actually saturate it a bit, and try to find just something by messing with the octaves, messing with the zoom, something that I feel like looks like, okay, that could be, you know, tonal variation in skin. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be messing with the masking and adjustment layers anyways. But the only issue is that when you're doing a Perlin noise filter, once you hit apply, the filter's locked in. Currently, there's not a Perlin noise live filter where you can adjust it like a normal adjustment layer. But I think for now, I think this looks okay. We're going to be doing a lot of work over this. This is just kind of like a base. Maybe actually zoom in. Okay, we're going to do something like that. It's a bit harsh. Let's go ahead and bring this brightness up. Okay, we're going to do something like that. You could play around forever and it's really hard to get it looking perfect, but we're going to start with this. Hit apply. And just like before, it's covering up the entire image. So for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a bug or a feature, this does not work as a luminosity mask. If you take it out, it just takes it out of the filter and not of the underlying image here. So that doesn't work, but we can do the same thing with blend options. Let's just take it out. And just like before, I don't mind going a bit over what we normally zoom in a little bit here so we can see what we're doing. So you can kind of see that there is some of that skin texture. I'm going to go actually more than I need to because I can adjust it later. And just like before, it's covering the entire image, so we need to mask that out. So let's go ahead and make a mask and invert it. And now with a white paintbrush, I'm going to go ahead and do a high flow. I can now paint in that texture, or that, not texture, that kind of tonal variation. Now it's really hard to see on YouTube, I imagine, so I'm going to show you. I'm going to create a curves layer and just drop it down. And so if I drop down the curves, you can kind of see those variations in kind of tones that I created. So this is kind of our fake tonal variation. You also notice that it covers up that underneath layer. But the reason why I have this normal base layer, which actually reminds me I should be labeling my layers now. Let's go ahead and label this to base. And let's label this noise. So the reason why I have this base layer is just because if I adjust the opacity on my noise layer, you know, there's always a base color underneath. So even if I take it to 0%, there's still that base color underneath, which I can still, of course, adjust. Rather than it being totally white, I just wanted to have a little bit of that base color underneath to kind of fill it in. So that's why that's there. All right, so now we have our base color and our noise. We can start playing with the opacity sliders a little bit to kind of find something that we feel like looks getting a bit naturally looking. Maybe something about like that. Now, of course, we did go way over, but that's fine because what we can do, remember, we have a mask here. So we can come to our mask. Let's do a black paintbrush and let's do a low flow. And I can kind of start taking it out a little bit on these edges here. And maybe the same thing here. I have this mask here, I think. Actually, no, here's my mask. I can kind of mask it out here as well, just to kind of help blend it in a bit better. Like I said, it's better to have the nose and the cheeks here on a separate layer so I can adjust them individually, but I'm just going to leave it here for now. Okay, so now we have these two layers, which gives us a really great foundation to start adding our texture on top of. And we're going to do that by creating a layer that just contains our skin texture, and then we're going to mask that skin texture into the areas where it's needed. So the first thing we need to do is turn off all these layers that we just made and go to Layer, Merge Visible. And now we'll have one layer with our original image on it without those extra layers we added. And with this layer selected, we are going to go to Filters, Sharpen, High Pass. Now this should look familiar as it looks like frequency separation. And this is actually the first step in doing frequency separation. Just Affinity has a nice filter that does it and makes it easy for you. So what I'm going to do is just adjust this slider to where I'm just getting some of that texture. I don't mind a little bit of color information coming in here, but I'm just going to do it. This is around here, 3 pixels, hit apply. Now we're going to change this blend mode from normal to linear light. And when you do that, you're going to notice your image gets overly sharpened, but that is okay because we're going to mask it out and then paint it in later. And so then we're going to go to our clone stamp tool and we're going to set it to current layer only, not current layer and below like we usually use it. So now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and turn our other layers back on. Let's actually label this texture before I forget. Now in our texture layer, we can take our clone stamp tool and we can start painting in texture from the surrounding area. Now you'll notice that there's not really a lot of fine kind of granular texture. Even when we come over here, the texture is very light. So we can pull texture from other parts that we think look nice. So for example, there's a lot of really great texture down here on her cheek. I can come over here and I can just use some of that texture because I think it really looks pretty nice. And maybe just grab some, I want to fill in as much texture as I can. Even if the edges are harsh or it's a bit too hard, that's fine because we're going to be able to mask it out and change it in places where we want. I just really want to get a lot of fine texture in here just to kind of have stuff to work with because we're always using masks. We can always make adjustments later. Let's not forget down here in the bridge of the nose. Maybe I'll just grab some of this, move it up and down. And the tip of the nose, I think this kind of has like this, usually tips of noses have that kind of like a little bit of a bumpy, porous texture. Okay, cool. So now we have our texture kind of painted in. So now what we're going to do is create a mask and we're going to invert that mask. So now we are going to use a paintbrush and we're going to select our color to be white. And let's do something like just 10% flow, 50% hardness for now. And now you can see I can actually paint in that texture. And we can actually paint in texture outside of our area we're correcting just to kind of help blend it in. Now this is really harsh, of course, but that's the great thing about using masks is now that we have this, I can mess with the opacity. I can lower the opacity to get it to where it looks, at least I feel, looking natural. We could also use a lower flow brush. Let's go ahead and raise it back up to 100. We can use a lower flow brush. Let's try changing it to black. And maybe if I think I just want these edges to be a bit softer, I can use a low flow brush to kind of blend those edges so that area is not so harsh. Maybe the texture here is a bit too hard. Just going to lower that a little bit. And even there on the nose, and maybe the tip of the nose, I don't want it to be so drastic, you could say. Okay, do something like that. Maybe I want to paint some of this back in a little bit. And then here, probably now I can come and adjust the opacity a little bit just to give me something that I think looks like texture. And then with this layer kind of not done in a sense, but with this layer up, now we can also use the other two layers and adjust the opacity on those. We can always adjust the masking on those as well to try to find a nice balance where we think that, okay, this is looking, you know, kind of acceptable. You know, maybe something a little bit like that. Now the forehead generally does not have a lot of texture. And because I'm trying to simulate that we don't have an overly bright hot spot, I don't want it to be super textured like that. I just want to have a little bit of kind of tonal variation there. And maybe to help increase the color, I can increase the underneath layers. So that's why I kind of like having this like stacked, this kind of stacked away, because I can really adjust everything really, really finely to get it really dialed in like the way I like. So I'm going to go ahead and just start off with something like this. Okay. I think that looks okay. We got a little bit of natural texture there. Now, all we need to really do is just use some dodge and burn to kind of help even out these tones. We can see this area is quite bright. Now I could, let me go ahead and turn these off. Yeah, see that's that big patch right here is really bright. So I think what I can do is I'm going to do my dodge and burn macro and just using a paintbrush, paint it to white. Let's just go ahead and do 3%. I'm going to actually start with burn to make it a bit darker. And I'm just going to come over here and just kind of darken that area down. Actually going to darken the surrounding area just because in a sense we lowered the exposure on her forehead. So I want to kind of lower the exposure in the surrounding area to kind of help it blend in a little bit better. And so you can see there, I'm not sure how much you can see it on YouTube, but you can see that I did just darken these edges to help it blend in together. I could also use dodge to kind of create a little bit of more depth by maybe doing some contouring on her nose. We can brighten the tip of the nose, maybe the bridge here. I think this part is a little bit too dark here, so I want to see if I can bring this down a little bit. And then just like doing our normal contour dodge and burn, we can use this dodge and burn layer to you know, help create a little bit more depth and even out. And I think this dark actually needs to go a bit darker because it is quite bright. So I'm going to adjust it here. Do something like that. And maybe even darken up a little bit here. Okay. And then, like I said, if I'm still not happy, I can always make adjustments to, if I want to actually bring back some of that highlight, I can lower the underneath layers, but we can just get it to a point where we feel like, okay, like this looks acceptable, right? I think, like I said at the beginning of the video, like ideally you wouldn't want to be in this position. You would just normally pick a better image, a properly exposed image, or you could find another picture with her actual skin tone and do some skin tone replacements with her own skin tone or skin texture. But, you know, it's nice to kind of be able to have this little technique or skill so that when you do come across these situations, which hopefully is not going to be too frequent, you're not completely, you know, stuck. You have options. And that's all I'm trying to do, is just show you options. There's probably more than one way to do this technique, but I think for now, I'm going to go ahead and grab all these layers. And we can see there's our before and there's our after. And if we zoom in a little bit, you know, it looks like we have some kind of natural skin texture there. Now I could still tweak. I think maybe I might want to actually bring back a little bit of the underneath highlight so you can see that's my super base layer that we did. And maybe I want to bring back that highlight to actually make it look more natural. And also you can see, because we lowered the exposure on our forehead, the exposure on our cheek should also be lowered. So what I would probably do is actually have a separate layer for the bridge of the nose and the cheeks and adjust their exposure accordingly. But for now, I think this is going to be our final result here. So this is our before, where we have a big patch of overexposed skin. And like I said, this was already underexposed and really bright highlight. So by the time I brought the exposure up in the JPEG, I just lost the highlight. And there, now we have something that looks like a real portrait, I hope. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I think that, you know, is this ready to go to print to be on the cover of Vogue magazine or some massive billboard on the side of a building? Probably not. But if you were doing that kind of work, you're probably not watching my videos, and you're probably not making these kind of mistakes where you have to do these kind of corrections. But for things for social media, for your own personal work, I think that this is more than acceptable to give you a really great result from an image that might otherwise be kind of ruined or unusable. Now I have something that we can at least show and make it look good. Okay, so that's going to be it for this video, guys. I appreciate your guys' views. I hope you found this interesting. This is honestly something I have had to do in the past, where I've accidentally shot in JPEG, and, you know, I had to spend a lot of time filling out, you know, creating fake skin tone for images that I didn't expose properly. So hopefully you won't be in that same position, but if you do, at least you have a few ideas on how you can make these kind of corrections. So anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.